Warning: graphic content. It's not an easy read. This is some brutal shit, guys. One of the reasons why I live in a fairly remote area of Utah is because I want to be away from large urban areas where things go sideways first when shit hits the fan, or SHTF, or Tiawaki, or whatever you want to call it, when society breaks down for an extended period of time. And I'm not just talking about a protest or a riot that lasts a couple of days. I'm talking about something much more severe. My philosophy is be prepared and then go enjoy your life. But I do want to bring to your attention a book, if you're not already familiar with it. This is a book by a guy who survived a war in a besieged city for over almost a year. And this really was a true SHTF, or shit hits the fan event. Selco Begovic is his name. And if you're in the prepper community, you're probably familiar with him. But a lot of you aren't necessarily in the community as much as you are just trying to get your bases covered. And if someone brings something to your attention that you haven't seen before, it might really be something that could change the trajectory. And you might get a little bit more serious about the things that matter most. That's why I'm covering this book today. So this does have a warning on there. It says, warning: graphic content. It's not an easy read. This is some brutal shit, guys. So I'm going to cover the top 10 takeaways that I got from this book. So if you have time to read it, please do. But if you don't, watch this video and I'll give you the things that I think will change the way you think about your preparedness. Normalcy bias is when you don't believe that things are changing and they are actually changing. In the book, Selco talks about, the people that died first were not the ones that were necessarily unprepared. They may have had stored food. They may have had plenty of weaponry. They may have had a fairly substantial group around them, but they were unwilling to recognize that the world that was happening around them was not the world that they grew up in, and that things were changing. In fact, he himself said that he was not really 100% clear that it was a real crisis until, I think he said, a mortar or something went into the apartment building across from him, and he could feel the heat from the flames coming through the window after this huge explosion, rocked his home. And he realized that there's people in there and they're dying right now, and I'm watching this happen, and this is real, and things aren't getting better, and the army's not going to come in. There are no peace negotiations taking place. No one's here. No one's going to save us. Here's where things get serious. You've got to recognize when things are not getting better and you are sliding into a severe crisis. And that's my main takeaway from this particular part of the book that Selco hammers on. It's normal for us to be in denial, really. It's sort of a protective system we have built into our consciousness, and it can get you killed. Another major takeaway from the book is that collapse happens gradually, and that ties into the normalcy bias. You're sort of sliding into this situation that's not getting better, and at a certain point you have to recognize that you are in the middle of a shit hits the fan. Now, I've felt a few times like we were getting there in this country, and we may have been, but we pulled back from it. So things seem to have normalized. But he said that a lot of people did not realize what was happening, and they refused to accept it because it didn't happen all at once, and they just kept thinking that it was going to get better. And I think this ties in with the normalcy bias. The two can lull you into a false state of security, and that is one of the main things that you've got to do. So how do you do that? How do you know that it's actually time? I think you would see ongoing events in cities spilling out into the surrounding neighborhoods that are going on for more than a few days. That starts to digress from a riot into a societal collapse of some sort. And I think that we have come close to that. And, we all know that there were bands of people going into neighborhoods, and, it was almost like they were going to pull people out with pitchforks and burn them at the stake. It felt like that. We've been there. We've been close. But I think right now we're in a somewhat better condition. But when that stuff is taking place and you're seeing it, especially if you're on Twitter and you're seeing it live, and you know that it's from street journalists and it's not some contrived, propaganda stunt from mainstream media, then you can start to zero in on the fact that something's happening. Your sense of alert, heightened awareness should stay heightened until that situation calms down, because you could at that point be sliding into something very dangerous. Selco made a point about the enemy wearing a familiar face, and people get really different. They change when things happen. If you've ever gone without a meal, you know that you can get hangry and your mood can go to hell and you can be very irritable just missing one meal. Imagine if you miss 3 meals or 3 days of meals, and especially if that includes fresh water. People aren't ready to go digging in the garbage right away. They're going to start to think of other ways to get food. So in the scenario that he describes, the grocery store's shelves became bare. People were not getting their heating oil delivered, and they were starting to burn picture frames and furniture. You know at that point that this is turning into a severe crisis. Others may not be as prepared as you, and so they may start to look to see what you have. That could be your neighbor. That could be someone that you perceived as a friend. It could also be someone who's wearing a police uniform. It could be someone who's dressed like someone from the military. You're going to need to verify that they are genuinely what they say. And you're going to have to do that without necessarily getting confrontational with them, verifying their badge number, trying to have some sort of a conversation that will give you a sense that they are who they are. And if it's your neighbor, just be very wary that they may come to you with a request to borrow something and actually end up conking you on the head and taking all your supplies. So you've got to, when things get this severe and the shelves are going bare, you either need to bug out, and if you're bugging in at your home, your neighbor may not be your friend. And I would say that at that point, you shouldn't really trust anybody. I would be highly suspicious of anyone coming to talk to you about anything at that point. You're going to have to get pretty brutal. And that's how he describes it in the book, that really no one trusted anybody at that point, except for maybe your immediate family. And you've got to trust them. And you're all in this together. You're living in the same household, and you're rationing your food. But you cannot afford to ration your food with outsiders. It's just the sad reality. So if someone comes over with their child and they're hungry and they're begging for food, it's your choice if you want to share it with them, but it will significantly shorten your ability to survive a prolonged crisis. This was a hard one for me to accept. The lone wolf strategy is a fantasy. You're not going to survive without others, because you can't stay up all night. You can't go gather food and leave your place vulnerable, or gather firewood and leave your place vulnerable. Someone has to be on watch 24/7. You can't necessarily treat your own wounds very effectively. You need help preparing food. It would be absolutely overwhelming to be in an absolute societal collapse alone trying to survive. I don't think you would very long. Eventually, people are going to catch on to what you're doing, and you really don't have any way to defend yourself. Eventually, you have to sleep. It's a sad state of reality that you've got to reach out to your fellow community members. And I've got another great book over here on my shelf called the Civil Defense Manual. It's a 2-part book that hammers on this idea of building a sort of a coalition of like-minded people around you. And that's not an easy thing to do, because people are busy and they don't have time for your, whack case into the world doom scenario. But I think you have to put it in a way, you have to present it in a way that is a little bit lighter. How you do that is really up to you, but now is the time to do that if you haven't already. You've got to at least start to have conversations and build relationships with people to where you know them well enough where you can kind of start to delve into those conversations just a little bit, like what would happen, or how could we help each other, or would you be willing to help, and see where they are with it. You might be surprised. Your things are not worth your life. If someone comes and they've got superior firepower, they're bigger, stronger than you, they're in a larger number than your group's number, you have to give them your stuff. Basically, you have to live another day. Selco said that a lot of people died that way in his town or in his surrounding area because they were trying to defend their food source, their ammunition, their weapons, and their loved ones. Now, I think for your loved ones, you're not going to let someone come in and do something really bad to your family. That's something you're going to have to die over. But I think if it's someone who's just coming around to collect supplies and they're looking for your weapons and your ammunition, you could, of course, have one buried as a stash, a redundant stash, and then give them what appears to be a reasonable amount of armament, food, preps in general, maybe some medical supplies that you're willing to give to them to survive another day. But then you have backups that are buried somewhere. And maybe you do that sort of quietly and your family doesn't even know about it because they may not be able to lie and pull it off as well as you are, as you would be able to in that moment when someone's asking really tough questions, especially if it's a gunpoint. It sounds really, really gloomy and doomy, but this situation was very gloomy and doomy. People were getting to the point where they were starving and they were becoming willing to join a gang of superior force to survive. And so there were roaming groups of people that were essentially raping and pillaging the villages. I think the strategy here is sort of like if you're getting mugged, just give them your ring, your watch, your wallet, let them have it, and just live another day. And you could give it to them and they could still kill you. You don't know. But at least you're appeasing them in a way that they may just go away. And that's the bet you're taking in that situation. Not a good place to be, but that's what happened. Before we get to the next key takeaway of this book, I'd like to hear your thoughts on where you are as far as preparations go. Not just the material stuff. I know you've got your guns, and I know you've probably got redundant energy sources. You've got generators and off-grid solar. If you don't, then these are things you could definitely do. But I'd love to hear what you have been doing and preparing for mentally and physically for the potential of a societal collapse of some sort. So leave that down in the comments below. And also give this video a thumbs up if you're enjoying it, because that really helps the algorithm, and YouTube absolutely shows it to more people the more thumbs up and comments that you get. And there's a lot of people that need to hear this message, frankly. So if you don't mind, help me do that. And if you'd like to subscribe, I would love to have you join our journey here at Collab Canyons Ranch. We're in southern Utah. We do a lot of content on off-grid living, off-grid solar power, and just general preparedness and living less connected to mainstream society and the big corporate energy conglomerates. The next takeaway is skills and your level of mental and physical fitness. One of the things that I really like about CrossFit is that it forces you to get into a dark place because you're enduring an enormous amount of pain, quite frankly, when you're doing a HIIT workout or a high-intensity interval training. It is high intensity, that's for sure, and sometimes you feel like you're not going to make it. So you can start to go into almost a state of altered consciousnness to get through that. Your heart rate is much higher than it's normally at rest, or even when you're walking or running. You're really almost at your max heart rate. And this teaches your body over time that you need to maintain that level of fitness, and it will respond accordingly. So that's sort of a physical and mental challenge to see if you have the fortitude to make it through a situation that's very uncomfortable and extremely stressful, both mentally and physically. And so I think CrossFit is sort of a great exercise to prepare your body and your mind for something that could go on for quite a while, being uncomfortable and being somewhat miserable and being able to function, not just to get by, but to actually thrive. This is important. Infection and filth kill more than bullets. This is one of the key takeaways that Selco talks about, that you may not have a way to sterilize water, and that's how people get sick and die. I mean, disease is the number one killer. Just a few hundred years ago, before we had modern medicine, before penicillin, people would die from really minor injuries. There was a movie, and I don't recall the name, where the guy ended up cutting his finger and he got an infection in his finger. It seems so simple, right? Because with our modern Western medicine, we can easily take care of an infection like that. Nobody really dies from that anymore. But if you don't have medical supplies or any access to something to clean that wound and keep that wound cleaned, it can turn into a nasty infection, and you can get sepsis and die from a cut on your finger or a stub toe. And a lot of people did. Having your first aid supplies is critical. Now, I went on Amazon and bought a first responder pack. It's got everything from sutures and, all sorts of bandages and emergency scissors to cut clothes off with if someone experiences trauma, all sorts of blood clotting materials in there. And I'm not a doctor. My wife is an RN. She would be the one that would be really stepping in, keeping wounds under control and helping maybe stitch up a bad cut, those types of things. But more people were dying from either foodborne illnesses because they were eating rotten foods, or from cuts and scrapes or fevers and things of that nature. So if you can amass antibiotics somehow, that's something that's perishable, so you'd have to keep refreshing that over time. I think that these are important things to think about. And as you build your war chest, definitely don't skip the medical supplies, because that could be and probably would be a fatal mistake in a prolonged grid down situation. Be invisible. The gray man survives in a situation like this. Selco talks about this extensively, that you don't want to be noticed, you don't want to make eye contact with the wrong people, and you don't want to look too nourished and clean and like you have supplies. You've got fresh clothes and your face is all nice and full and you look very nourished, where everyone else is starting to get sort of sucked in and sick looking. So you'd want to camouflage yourself to blend in. You don't necessarily need to become malnourished or starve yourself, but I definitely wouldn't overeat. You probably would want to slightly undereat. Losing a little bit of weight would probably be a good thing in this scenario. You know where I'm going with this. They're going to spot you. They're going to see you. And this would apply to us that have backup power. You're going to want to have something to put over your windows at night so that people can't see that you've got lights on, or you're the biggest target in the neighborhood. Everyone's going to be at your door. Because if you were smart enough to pre-plan redundant energy, surely you've got redundant water and ammunition and food stores. Guns and ammunition are not just for self-protection, but they're for hunting. All the big game are going to disappear really quickly in a situation like this. But you might still be able to find things like squirrels and rabbits or, birds, things that you could eat. And, having weaponry would be really, really important for anybody to have. So anything that you do that signals to them that you were smart and prepared more so than they are, they're going to start focusing on you. After about a week or so, when people are starving and they haven't had fresh water, they're going to come. They're going to find you. I don't think Selco will ever fully recover. He says that when the bill comes, it's paid with your mind. I think he means that you will have scars, permanent psychological scars after something like this. I really do recommend reading the book, because it gets into some really difficult to imagine circumstances where, the smell of rotting flesh and people eating cans of canned foods that have gone bad, have been compromised, have worms in them, became a regular thing for them. And that's really the tip of the iceberg. Just to traverse from one place to another, you had to assume that people were watching, and that there were snipers and others that were looking for anyone moving around. And why would you be moving around? And they're going to follow you. They're going to find your stash. So it becomes really a day by day, hour by hour, minute by minute survival nightmare. And the psychological implications of that are severe and long lasting. But I think getting out and talking to people and helping others, and I think through his book, he's able to certainly help folks like me that really never spent that much time thinking about how bad things could really get and what a true situation, not a Hollywood situation, but a true situation would look like. I've done a lot of firearms training, and some of the guys, they're all from various SWAT cadres. At this particular place, I go to International Tactical Training Institute out of Los Angeles area. Scott Reitz and his group spend a lot of time lecturing to help people understand how an actual gunfight goes down and how different it is from anything that you would imagine, certainly watching a flick like John Wick, which is totally ridiculous. I think Selco's message is very much the same way. It's not going to be romantic. It's not going to be Hollywood-like. It's going to be a slow, gradual descent into a dark, dark nightmare that you will never, ever get over for the rest of your life. And so we all hope that we can prevent that from happening, and that we can heal our society through other means, that we don't have to go to that depth to rebound. And I think every society or every generation maybe has to get their hand burned on the stove to learn that lesson, that you don't want to go to war and you don't want anything to break down societally. So normal times are great. Enjoy them while they're here. Be prepared, but also be happy and try to enjoy your life. Once you're prepared, just know that, maintain your skills and your physical and your mental fortitude. Practice that through something like CrossFit or doing very difficult, challenging hikes or workouts to maintain your ability to get through something very difficult, because you've pre-trained your mind and your body to do that. And then aside from that, go enjoy your life. That's my message here today. And again, just a final acknowledgement for Selco Begovic for sharing this really harrowing experience with us and helping us better prepare our minds should something like this happen in real life. It was an eye-opener for me, and again, let's just hope that we never devolve into a situation like that in our lifetimes. But if it does, be prepared. And if you'd like to learn a little bit more about how I've prepared to secure the ranch in a grid down situation, I'll leave that video right here.